Assalamualaikum everyone. Today we're learning Martin 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 Luther Jr. Let's get started.
Yep, that's where he gave his biggest speech. Dear Tim and Moby, can you do a Martin Luther King movie? Thanks, Amari. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most important leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement. That was the effort to extend equal rights to all people, regardless of race. Well, in the first half of the 20th century, that was a controversial idea. In many parts of the country, African Americans were barred from participating in ordinary life. They couldn't eat at the same lunch tables, go to the same schools, or even use the same bathrooms as white people. This practice of separating African Americans from white people was called segregation. In the South, segregation was enforced through Jim Crow laws. They made it illegal for African Americans to mix with whites. They policed black behavior, too. African Americans had to live in separate neighborhoods, hold specific jobs, and talk to whites with the utmost respect. Try to fight it, and you risk jail time, injury, even death. There were no Jim Crow laws up north, but unspoken rules still kept African Americans apart. In many places, white homeowners would only sell their houses to other white people. These informal codes ensured that African Americans remained second-class citizens. Martin Luther King grew up in the midst of all that inequality. He was born in 1929 to a middle-class family in Atlanta, Georgia. Both his grandfather and his father were pastors at a local church. King attended religious colleges up north, in Philadelphia and Boston. He noticed black and white people mixing more freely than he'd seen growing up. Though these cities had their share of racial tension, they were a far cry from the way things were down south. Dr. King moved to Montgomery, Alabama with his wife, Coretta, in 1953. He became a pastor and community leader. Around that time, a local woman named Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give her bus seat to a white man. King joined forces with activist Joanne Robinson to organize a massive boycott of the Montgomery bus system. Most black citizens of Montgomery refused to ride the buses for over a year. Many were violently attacked just for walking instead of taking a bus. Dr. King's house was bombed, and along with dozens of other protesters, he was thrown in jail. But these injustices drew national attention to the issue. And in 1956, a Supreme Court decision banned segregated buses. After that victory, King helped organize a group of churches dedicated to nonviolent protests for civil rights. He was inspired by the life of Mahatma Gandhi, whose nonviolent leadership helped free India from British rule. Over the next decade, King led protests and marches all over the country. The biggest was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered in the nation's capital to support civil rights. It was there that Dr. King delivered his momentous I Have a Dream speech.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Yeah, kind of gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? King's gift for public speaking helped inspire millions of people. His words gave them the hope and courage to believe in the future he envisioned. 2 years later, the protests he led throughout Alabama caught the world's attention. People watched in shock as local police turned fire hoses and attack dogs on peaceful protesters. Well, people often feel threatened by change. In fact, making folks uncomfortable was kind of the point of all this protest. In a letter written from an Alabama jail, King said, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue." In other words, things change only when conditions are made so stressful, people demand it. Oh yeah, King was arrested lots of times during these marches, but the result was worth it. His work pressured Congress to pass groundbreaking laws, moving society closer to his vision. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 overturned segregation laws around the country. In 1964, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He went on to fight against poverty and the Vietnam War. Then, in 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. His killer, James Earl Ray, was captured months later. King was only 39 years old, but in his short life, he changed the face of this country. Without his influence, who knows how long it would have been before equal rights were protected for everyone? Yeah, you're right. We still struggle with racial equality to this day. But thanks to Dr. King and other civil rights leaders, we know that great change is possible.
I have a dream today.
The next thing is
There's no one. Shit. I add her. No, yeah. Now join. How about you? Join.
Word ninkaan alla markaad isku soo baahatid wuu dhex taagan yahay.
How about you? I want to be nice.
Gacdu ma socoti.
Yeah, that's okay. I have
the next thing is math.
$16,000. Right there. You're not with us. Yes, I am. I'm in red. I'm in blue. Over there. Then go there. If I friend you, accept it. I am. Then. Wow, slap and shut up. Well, you have to restart it, so I'm sorry. Here, start it. Start it up. Restart? Yeah, bro. I have 19.
The next thing is math.
Should I get in purple or whatever you want? I have too much money. Should I go to
Boy, would you look at that view? Hey, how much further is it? Huh. What do you say we take a little break for a letter? Whew. Dear Tim and Moby, we start adding and subtracting integers tomorrow. That seems so easy. What's the point? From Caleb. Well, integers are like the good old regular whole numbers we use every day, so I suppose adding and subtracting them can be pretty easy. But there's one catch. Unlike whole numbers, integers can be positive or negative. You probably add and subtract positive integers all day long without even realizing it. But when you're dealing with negative integers, it's a bit trickier. This is where a number line comes in handy. Say we want to add -4 and -5. -4 and -5 are both negative integers, so you know the answer will also be a negative integer, in this case, -9. Good question. What if we add -4 and a +5? When you add a negative and a positive integer, the sum will have the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value, or distance from 0, on the number line, in this case, the +5. And our answer is +1. Well, think about it. 4 and -4 are additive inverses. They cancel each other out, and their sum is always 0. But we added one more than 4, so there was one left over, and that gives us our answer. Wait, Moby, there's more explaining to do. See, number lines are great when the numbers we're dealing with are relatively small. But with bigger numbers, they don't really help us so much. For these numbers, it's better to keep in mind two key rules. First, adding a negative number is like subtracting a positive one. Let's say we hike up to 1,000 meters in altitude on this here mountain. But as we're going up, I drop my hat. So I turn around and walk 200 meters down the slope to get it back. To figure out the position of my hat, we add a negative number, which is the same as subtracting a positive one. I got all the way up to 1,000 meters, but then I traveled 200 meters down the slope. Since I reversed direction, I can write the 200 meters as a negative number. So 1,000 plus minus 200 equals 800. So it's the same as subtracting positive 200. Okay, the second rule. Subtracting a negative number is like adding a positive one. To see that, let's try to figure out the difference in altitude between the top of this mountain and the bottom of that lake. That means subtracting a negative number. The mountain's summit is 1,025 meters above sea level. That's a positive number. The lake's bottom is 155 meters below sea level. We can treat that as a negative number, negative 155. If subtracting a negative number is the same as adding its inverse, then we can say that 1 minus negative 1 equals 1 plus 1. So we can replace that minus negative 155 with a plus 155. The difference in altitude is 1,180 meters. Well, to express this as a general rule, we can say that A minus negative B equals A plus B. It's a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's easier than walking downhill. Which I'd like to be doing right now. Alright.
No, he has a thing. What thing? He has a, what do you call it, that grapple. Hey, do you open your base? I'm not doing. Do you have grapple with it in your base? No, I'm not. Huh? This guy just killed me. Yeah, it's literally in.
Are those pies for the bake sale? I sure like pie. Please? Oh. Dear Tim and Moby, I want to know how to add and subtract fractions. From Joshua. Well, pies are perfect for talking about fractions. As you can see, this is 1 pie. That's 1 part of 1 whole, or 1 over 1 in fraction form. If I cut the pie right down the middle, I get 2 pieces. Each piece is 1 divided by 2, or 1/2 of the whole. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 2 halves, or 1 whole. In a fraction, the numbers have names. The top number is the numerator, and the bottom number is the denominator. The denominator tells us how many pieces make up 1 whole. The numerator tells us how many of those pieces we're dealing with. Right, the 2 in this case is a common denominator shared by both fractions. When you add fractions with the same denominator, you add the numerators while the denominator stays the same. Each of these pieces is 1 divided by 4, or 1/4 of the whole. We can see that 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 2/4, or 1/2. So let's say we want to add 1/4 of this pie to 1/2 of another one. Cutting pie. 1/4 and 1/2 are fractions with different denominators. To add them, we need to find their LCD, or lowest common denominator. That's basically the lowest common multiple of the fraction's denominators. For our denominators, 2 and 4, that number is 4. So we want to write all of our fractions as fractions of 4. 1/4 already is, and as we saw before, 1/2 and 2/4 are really the same thing. Now that we have a common denominator, we can just add the numerators. 2/4 plus 1/4 equals 3/4. Well, subtraction is the same idea. As long as we have a common denominator, it's just a matter of subtracting the numerators. If we don't have a common denominator, we find the lowest common denominator and rewrite our fractions to match. Here's a good example. Last year, Moby's pies were the highest selling items in the bake sale. In fact, 5/9 of all the students in our school bought them. But the year before, only 5/12 of the school bought the pies. Come on, it was the first year you made them. People didn't know how good they were yet. Anyway, to find out what fraction of students bought the pies the second year, but not the first year, we would subtract 5/12 from 5/9. Okay, the denominators are 9 and 12. What's the LCD? Good, 36. That's the lowest number that both 9 and 12 multiply into evenly. So let's rewrite our fractions as fractions of 36. Let's see, to turn 9 into 36, we need to multiply it by 4, which means we also have to multiply the numerator by 4. And to turn 12 into 36, we multiply it by 3, which means we also multiply 5 by 3. Now we can just subtract the numerators to get our answer. So, between last year and the year before, your sales increased by 5/36. All these pies we cut up, they're gonna go bad unless I eat them. Oh. Ow. This is your fault for making so many pies. Ugh.
We killed each other. I got my cartridge. Alexa, are you working here or what? Get out of my place. What? You are? Alexa, you're right next to me. Alexa, follow me, okay? Don't go to my face or else I'm going to go to you. You can't kill your sister. Hey, stop pushing me, Alexa. Alexa, when Save is... Oh, I have an arrow. I can shoot at you guys. Stop. I'm going to send out some curls. You know I can they don't to actually see. Stop.
Yeah.
Arrow, it did 50 damage. Now, stop.
Dear Tim and Moby, how many organs do we have, and what do they all do? Curious, Galen. I think he's talking about human organs. Ah! What the what? Kinda looks like a cryosleep chamber. Anyway, scientists who study anatomy, the body's structure, say that we have about 80 organs. It's hard to pin down an exact number because the definition isn't so precise. An organ is just a part of the body that carries out specific functions, like how the lungs take in oxygen and expel carbon dioxide. All organs are made of tissues, groups of similar cells. Some organs will be familiar to you, like the heart. Others you may never have heard of, like the pineal gland. It's a tiny structure in the brain that controls your sleep cycle. Organs might be as spread out as blood vessels or... Sorry, got a little carried away there. Point is, we have dozens of organs that handle thousands of different tasks, and they all have to work together to keep your body going. To keep it all straight, scientists categorize organs into 11 systems. Each system is responsible for one or more complex tasks, like moving around or breathing. We'll start with one you've probably heard of, the skeletal system. It gives the body shape, providing support and protection for other organs. The skeleton is made up of more than 200 bones. It also includes cartilage to cushion our joints where bones meet, plus ligaments that connect bone to bone, and tendons that connect bone to muscle. When a muscle flexes, it pulls the tendon, which in turn pulls the bone. That's why the muscular system is often grouped together with the skeletal. Together, they're known as the locomotor system because they let us move around. Voluntary actions like running, talking, and sitting are handled by skeletal muscles. Other muscles work automatically, like the ones in your stomach that help move food along. Speaking of which, the stomach is part of the digestive system, which breaks down our food. It starts with our mouth, where we take in and chew food, continues to our stomach and intestines, which extract and absorb nutrients, and ends when we get rid of the solid waste in the bathroom. The excretory system removes another kind of waste product. It takes toxic chemicals out of our blood and dissolves them in water. We get rid of this stuff when we pee. Yep, blood is carried around by our circulatory system. The heart is the motor of this system, pumping blood everywhere it's needed. And blood vessels are the tubes that take it there. All of the other body systems depend on a fresh supply of blood. The respiratory system uses blood to pick up oxygen from our lungs. And the heart pumps out that oxygen-rich blood to our different cells. They use the oxygen for energy, and in the process produce a waste gas called carbon dioxide. The blood takes that back to the lungs to be exhaled. The lymphatic system relies on circulation too. It consists of a network of tubes, similar to blood vessels. Its main role is to absorb fluid that builds up between our cells. It returns this fluid back to our bloodstream. But it also plays an important role in our immune response. Lymphatic organs create white blood cells. They help destroy germs that can make us sick. Circulation helps out the endocrine system too. Its organs, or glands, produce hormones. Those are chemical messengers that tell organs, tissues, and cells to do different things. Hormones get where they need to go through your blood vessels. For example, after you eat, your pancreas releases a hormone called insulin. It tells your cells to absorb sugar from the blood. Some endocrine organs are also part of our reproductive system. That's basically what humans use to, well, make more humans. If I were female, my reproductive system would look like this. Moving on. Our nervous system includes the brain, spinal cord, and a network of long nerves. Those carry electrical signals to tissues and organs throughout the body. Signals from sense organs to your brain let you see, feel, hear, taste, and all that other good stuff. Signals from your brain to your skeletal muscles let you move around. And signals inside the brain carry all of your thoughts, feelings, and dreams. Last but not least is our integumentary system. It includes our skin, hair, and nails. All our other systems are protected by this flexible covering. Yeah, the human body is a pretty amazing machine. Maybe even more amazing than this contraption of yours. How do I get out anyway? This button?
Cryo sleep mode activated.
No. Oh. How long have I been asleep? 3 weeks. Huh. What a gorgeous day. Come on, let's go outside. But you haven't budged in like 3 hours. Dear Tim and Moby, what is obesity? Is it the same as being overweight? Thanks, Robert. Actually, it's more than just being overweight. It's weighing a lot more than what's normal for your height and age. Obesity is a condition in which a person builds up dangerous amounts of body fat. Well, sure, everyone needs some body fat to stay warm, store energy for your cells, and protect your internal organs. And carrying a few extra pounds doesn't necessarily mean you're overweight or obese. It's when a few extra pounds turns into a lot of extra pounds that people get into trouble. Doctors often measure how much body fat someone has through body mass index, or BMI. It's calculated as weight divided by the square of your height. It's not an exact science, but for adults, a BMI of 25 or more generally means you're overweight, and a BMI of 30 or more means you're obese. For kids, the calculation is a bit different. If your BMI is higher than 85% of kids your age, you're overweight. If it's in the 95th percentile, you're obese. More people are overweight now than ever before, and the numbers are growing at a scary rate. Today, 1 in 3 American adults is obese, and 1 in 6 children. Well, there are a few different causes. Let's start with the energy stored inside food, which is measured in units called calories. Our bodies use this energy to keep our cells running. But when we take in more calories than our cells need, the extra energy is stored as body fat. The problem is, the typical American diet is full of high-calorie foods. On top of that, the quality of the food we eat has declined. Our modern diet is filled with processed food, altered from its natural state to last longer or taste better. Processing can rob food of nutrition, and that means that your body is more likely to store its energy as fat. One cool thing to know is that when you eat more wholesome foods, your body and brain feel more satisfied, which can actually keep you from feeling hungry. Right, diet isn't the only problem. These days, lots of people lead less active lifestyles. Think about it. How much time do you spend sitting in front of a TV or computer? People who are sedentary or physically inactive burn fewer calories than people who are constantly on the move. Poor eating habits combined with inactivity increases body fat, and that opens you up to a slew of health problems. For one thing, carrying all that extra weight puts physical stress on all parts of the body, especially the bones and joints of the legs. Obesity can worsen the effects of asthma and lead to sleeping problems, low energy, and depression. And obese people have a higher risk of developing diabetes, a deadly disease in which the body can't process sugar. That's not the worst of it. Too much body fat can block arteries and lead to high blood pressure or hypertension. Hypertension forces the heart to work harder to pump blood through the body, which can lead to heart failure and death. This makes obesity a major contributor to cardiovascular disease, a group of heart problems that together are the leading cause of death in the world. The American diet is full of high-calorie foods. On top of that, the quality of the food we eat has declined. Our modern diet is filled with processed food, altered from its natural state to last longer or taste better. Processing can rob food of nutrition, and that means that your body is more likely to store its energy as fat. One cool thing to know is that when you eat more wholesome foods, your body and brain feel more satisfied, which can actually keep you from feeling hungry. Right, diet isn't the only problem. These days, lots of people lead less active lifestyles. Think about it. How much time do you spend sitting in front of a TV or computer? People who are sedentary or physically inactive burn fewer calories than people who are constantly on the move. Poor eating habits combined with inactivity increases body fat, and that opens you up to a slew of health problems. For one thing, carrying all that extra weight puts physical stress on all parts of the body, especially the bones and joints of the legs. Obesity can worsen the effects of asthma and lead to sleeping problems, low energy, and depression. And obese people have a higher risk of developing diabetes, a deadly disease in which the body can't process sugar. That's not the worst of it. Too much body fat can block arteries and lead to high blood pressure or hypertension. Hypertension forces the heart to work harder to pump blood through the body, which can lead to heart failure and death. This makes obesity a major contributor to cardiovascular disease, a group of heart problems that together are the leading cause of death in the world. Okay, want to hear the good news? A lot of these problems are preventable. A combination of smart eating and regular exercise is the best plan for fighting obesity, as well as preventing it in the first place. Choosing low-calorie snacks like fruits and vegetables and avoiding sugary drinks are two easy ways to cut down on calories. At meals, keep your portion sizes manageable, say no thanks to seconds, and try eating only at the table. Staying active is the other half of the plan. Try to exercise regularly. Sometimes, all it takes is little choices, like walking instead of taking the bus, or climbing stairs instead of hopping on elevators. Physical activity burns calories and strengthens bones and muscles, and it's also a great way to lift your mood. That's true. Some people who lead healthy lifestyles still struggle with weight. Hormones and other genetic factors can make some people more likely to gain weight and keep it on. So, if you are concerned about your weight, talk to your parents or another adult you trust and see a doctor or a nutritionist before you take action. They'll be able to identify if you really do have a weight problem and if there's anything you should do about it. Dieting on your own is not really a good idea. Better to get advice from someone who can recommend specific changes in eating and activity behaviors. Now, are you ready for some football? Disease in which the body can't process sugar. That's not the worst of it. Too much body fat can block arteries and lead to high blood pressure or hypertension. Hypertension forces the heart to work harder to pump blood through the body, which can lead to heart failure and death. This makes obesity a major contributor to cardiovascular disease, a group of heart problems that together are the leading cause of death in the world. Okay, want to hear the good news? A lot of these problems are preventable. A combination of smart eating and regular exercise is the best plan for fighting obesity, as well as preventing it in the first place. Choosing low-calorie snacks like fruits and vegetables and avoiding sugary drinks are two easy ways to cut down on calories. At meals, keep your portion sizes manageable, say no thanks to seconds, and try eating only at the table. Staying active is the other half of the plan. Try to exercise regularly. Sometimes, all it takes is little choices, like walking instead of taking the bus, or climbing stairs instead of hopping on elevators. Physical activity burns calories and strengthens bones and muscles, and it's also a great way to lift your mood. That's true. Some people who lead healthy lifestyles still struggle with weight. Hormones and other genetic factors can make some people more likely to gain weight and keep it on. So, if you are concerned about your weight, talk to your parents or another adult you trust and see a doctor or a nutritionist before you take action. They'll be able to identify if you really do have a weight problem and if there's anything you should do about it. Dieting on your own is not really a good idea. Better to get advice from someone who can recommend specific changes in eating and activity behaviors. Now, are you ready for some football? I never said you had to stop using doors.
Who killed her? Is that guy? No! No, I'm killing him. He killed the husband. No! Who? My twin? No, that blue guy. From there? Yes, he killed the husband. Find him. Got it! Oh, shit. He was so... Because he had the whole thing. I didn't have my full power. That hits you in one shot.
Of course I have a pulse. Try again. Dear Tim and Moby, how does blood move through your body? From Josh. Blood circulates through your body in a network of blood vessels. This network is miles and miles long. Your heart, blood, and blood vessels make up your cardiovascular system, also known as your circulatory system. The cardiovascular system is responsible for a cycle that moves blood from the heart to every part of your body and back again. At the center of your cardiovascular system is your heart. The heart is a muscle that pumps blood through your body, and it handles 3 types of circulation. Your heart has its very own network of blood vessels that brings nutrients in and removes waste. This is called coronary circulation, the flow of blood within the heart itself. Pulmonary circulation is the flow of blood through the heart to the lungs. In the lungs, blood drops off carbon dioxide for you to breathe out. Then it picks up the oxygen that comes into the lungs when you breathe in. That oxygen-rich blood heads back to your heart, which brings us to systemic circulation. Systemic circulation brings oxygen to all the cells that need it and removes their waste products. Blood cycles through your body by moving from your heart to your arteries. It goes into smaller blood vessels called capillaries, and then into veins and back to your heart. Blood leaves your heart through a big artery called the aorta. Blood drops off its cargo of nutrients and oxygen, providing your cells with the fuels they need to do their jobs. Then it picks up carbon dioxide and other waste products, taking them away for disposal. Solid waste is dropped off at the kidneys, and carbon dioxide is exchanged in the lungs for a fresh supply of oxygen. And then it's back around again, all day, all night, including weekends and holidays, for the rest of your life. Do we have to do this now? Huh? You're alive. You're alive! Dad! Dad, Moby's alive. He's not a robot after all.
Why are you wearing my brother's skin? Because she's using your account. Did she die? Oh, damn. Did she die? Are you okay? I don't care.
Good morning, Mr. President. Wait a minute. Where am I?
I always look
Moby!
He's running back to his baby.
Good morning, Mr. President. Wait a minute. Where am I? Moby! Dear Tim and Moby, who was Abraham Lincoln and what did he do? From Neil. You couldn't wait till after breakfast to teleport us here? Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. He served from 1861 to 1865. He brought about the end of slavery and guided the U.S. through the Civil War. These accomplishments have earned Lincoln a place among America's greatest presidents. It's true, he really was born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809. His parents were poor farmers, and young Abe grew up in serious poverty. After Abe's mother died of an illness, his father married one of their neighbors. She was a big influence on young Abe and encouraged him to go to school. Yep, Lincoln did grow to be quite tall, 6 feet 4 inches to be exact, and strong too. In 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, and began a career as a lawyer. He soon married a woman named Mary Todd, and with her had 4 sons. Hang on, I'm getting to the good stuff. Lincoln's political career started in the Illinois State Legislature, where he served 4 terms from 1838 to 1841. Then, in 1846, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served 1 term. As a congressman, he supported laws that would have banned slavery in any new territories acquired by the United States. Lincoln thought that the Constitution protected slavery in states where it already existed. But he also believed the Founding Fathers did not want it to spread to new territories. He personally hoped that slavery would die out naturally as more and more free states were added to the country. But in 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which let new territories decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery. In response, Lincoln gave a speech that outlined his moral, political, and economic arguments against slavery. Around the same time, he helped form the new Republican Party, which had an anti-slavery platform. In 1858, he ran for the U.S. Senate against Illinois Democrat Stephen A. Douglas, a major supporter of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The 7 Lincoln-Douglas debates were the highlight of the campaign. Lincoln went toe-to-toe with the more well-known Douglas, challenging him on the topic of slavery. Lincoln lost the election, but his brilliant performance in the debates turned him into a major political star. The Republican Party picked him as its candidate for the 1860 presidential election, and this time he defeated Douglas to win the presidency. But there was no time to celebrate. Before he took office, 7 southern states seceded or left the Union because they opposed Lincoln's stance on slavery. 4 more followed before the year was out. These 11 states declared themselves the Confederate States of America. Lincoln believed that secession was illegal, and he was willing to use force to preserve the Union. When Confederate troops fired on Union troops at Fort Sumter, South Carolina in 1861, the Civil War began. Oh yeah, throughout the war, Lincoln took an active role in military strategy, including the picking of top generals. And in 1862, he issued his Emancipation Proclamation. It freed all the slaves in Confederate-controlled territory as of January 1st, 1863, and it also opened the door for African-American soldiers to fight in the Union Army. Lincoln then worked on the passage of the 13th Amendment, which would permanently abolish slavery throughout the United States. This is Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 was a major Union victory and one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. Months after the battle, during a ceremony for the fallen soldiers, Lincoln delivered one of the most famous speeches in U.S. history. The Gettysburg Address lasted just over 2 minutes, but it transformed American political thought. Using simple but poetic language, Lincoln reminded his audience that the Declaration of Independence was America's founding document. The message was clear. Even if the Constitution allowed states to make their own laws about slavery, the Declaration's promise of equality for everyone was more important. In 1864, with Union victory in sight, Lincoln was re-elected in a landslide. He proposed a generous policy toward the South that would quickly put the bitterness of the war behind them, but some refused to let old grudges die. An actor named John Wilkes Booth was furious with Lincoln for promising to grant rights to former slaves. On April 14, 1865, while the President and First Lady were attending a play at Ford's Theater, Booth snuck into the President's box and shot him. Lincoln died from the wound the next day. He was the first U.S. President to be assassinated. But Booth couldn't destroy Lincoln's legacy. Over the course of his amazing life, Lincoln reunited a fractured nation and almost single-handedly ended slavery in the process. What the? Oh, this is just perfect.
Moby, have you seen my 3/4 hat? Give me that. I'm gonna be late for my fife and drum corps. Dear Tim and Moby, why do they call George Washington the father of his country? From Lada. Well, there are pretty good reasons for that. George Washington was the commander-in-chief of the American Army during the Revolutionary War. America won its independence from England in that war. So when it came time to elect our first president, Washington was the natural choice. For those reasons, Washington is considered the foremost of the founding fathers. That was the group of men who established the United States in its early years. Washington was born in Virginia on February 22nd, 1732, the oldest son of a wealthy farming family. He entered public service at the young age of 17, becoming a government surveyor. That's someone who determines exact land boundaries between properties, towns, and states. A few years later, Washington joined the colonial militia, or volunteer army. He was quickly promoted and led a raid on a French army unit in what is now Ohio. This small battle eventually led to the French and Indian War, a 7-year conflict between England and France over territories in America.
I bet my
Washington retired from the militia as a full colonel with a reputation for bravery. He married and joined the Virginia House of Burgesses, Virginia's legislature. During Washington's time as a representative, England's Parliament passed the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and Townshend Acts.
Why did you call on it?
These laws imposed heavy taxes on the American colonies, even though the colonists had no representation in the British Parliament. Along with many of his fellow representatives, Washington grew to believe that the colonies needed to separate from England. When war finally broke out in 1775, Washington was elected general and commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He proved to be a capable leader and strategic thinker. His Christmas Day attack across the ice-clogged Delaware River scored an early victory for the colonists. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, a quarter of Washington's troops died at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, from cold, starvation, and disease. But his strong leadership kept the army together. He led the Continental Army to its final victory against England at the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. After the war, Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, where the U.S. Constitution was written. He was elected the first president of the United States in 1789. Because the country was brand new, there was a lot of work to do. Most presidents appoint one or two Supreme Court justices. Washington had to appoint the entire Supreme Court. He also oversaw the ratification of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The United States was still young, so there was a lot of disagreement in Congress about which direction to take. Washington used his immense popularity to keep the country together. And because he was the first president, he set a lot of precedents or examples for the office. Like, he left office after 2 terms, even though he would have easily won another election. Some people even wanted to make him king. Until Franklin D. Roosevelt, every president followed the 2-term precedent. And after FDR, this custom became law. U.S. presidents cannot be elected to more than 2 terms in office. Before he stepped down in 1796, Washington delivered his farewell address. In it, he warned Americans that they needed to stick together or lose the liberty they'd fought so hard for. Yeah, that's true. Washington didn't think all Americans were deserving of such freedoms. He kept hundreds of enslaved people at his Virginia estate, Mount Vernon. At first, he saw nothing wrong with fighting for freedom while owning human beings. But his views evolved, maybe due to friendships with Northerners like Ben Franklin and John Adams. Both men strongly opposed slavery, as did many other figures of the Revolution. By the time he was president, Washington had come to believe that slavery needed to end. But he worried that outlawing it too quickly and too soon would tear the country apart. As for his own enslaved labor, Washington ordered them to be set free, but only after his death in 1799. He was buried at Mount Vernon. Today, Washington's estate is a National Historic Landmark. The buildings and grounds have been preserved, including the slave quarters. It's an amazing place to learn more about the full story of our first president. So, you really want to join the Fife and Drum Corps?
Why are you going very fast? You're about to get a long base, I'm just telling you. Did you just see what I did?
Hey, where'd you get that?
Yeah.
You made it yourself? No way. Dear Tim and Moby, I heard about this guy who invented a million things with peanuts. Can you tell me about him? Curious, Eddie. George Washington Carver did some pretty amazing things with peanuts. During his career, he used them to create over 300 distinct products. But Carver's rise to fame as the Peanut Man is only a small part of his story. He was an agricultural scientist studying how soil chemistry affects crop yields, but he didn't just stay in the lab. He persuaded farmers around the country to adopt more scientific practices, and that makes him one of the most influential scientists of his day. His achievements are all the more impressive given the struggles he faced as an African American. Carver was born into slavery in Missouri during the Civil War. His father died before he was born. Shortly after that, slave traders kidnapped his mother from the plantation. So the owners, Moses and Susan Carver, raised George themselves. As a child, Carver struggled with illness. Stuck indoors, he developed a close connection to Susan Carver. She taught him about herbal medicines, and young George quickly became fascinated with plants. His obsession grew into expertise. Neighbors began calling him a plant doctor. They came to him for advice on caring for the health of their gardens. Farmers were in awe of Carver's intellect and knowledge. But despite his brilliance, he was barred from attending the local school. Slavery had ended with the Civil War, but life in the post-war South was defined by segregation, the forced separation of races. African Americans were often mistreated and not given the same opportunities as white people.
Saying, wait a minute, I need to say something in the chat. So I looked to the left and went shopping. Well, that's awkward. Whoa. Don't kill my friend. Please. No! Well, he's about to be good. No. It's my friend. It's my friend. Well, he's gonna die.
The next
Come here, boy.
الرحمن
Double kill!
الرحيم
And I just went through.
الملك القدوس
You always be
السلام
bad boy. You always be mean
المؤمن
to people.
المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر الخالق البارئ الغفار القهار الوهاب الرزاق
Say hi to him.
الفتاح العليم القابض الباسط الخافض الرافع المعز المذل السميع البصير الحكم العدل اللطيف الخبير الحليم العظيم الغفور العلي الكبير الحفيظ المقيت الحسيب الجليل الكريم الرقيب المجيب الواسع الحكيم الودود المجيد الباعث الشهيد الحق الوكيل القوي المتين الولي الحميد المحصي المبدئ المعيد المحيي المميت الحي القيوم الواجد
الماجد الواحد الأحد الصمد القادر المقتدر المقدم المؤخر الأول الآخر الظاهر الباطن الوالي المتعال البر التواب.
Constant is hard.
Do that green thing!
What green thing?
That one!
Oh, so you want balls, right? You want some balls? You want some balls with you?
Yes. You stop!
I wonder how much I have. 2 lectures or 5,000.
I need to get some more
The
money.
Queen Ant's Birthday. Written by Elise
When I get more
Sweeney.
money, then I can
Illustrated
pass it up
by
to
Nora
the
Vutas.
That is why people have it.
Today is a big day at the ant nest. It's the Queen Ant's birthday.
That's what I did.
The ants have many jobs to do before the Queen wakes up. They will work together to surprise her with a party.
Let's have a party. Let's have a
Some
party.
worker ants clean the nest. They use their 6 legs to make the rooms neat.
Why you think that?
They fix cracks in the walls. They dig to make the rooms bigger. Other workers go out to look for food.